You've probably heard that old saying, right? The simplest explanation is usually the right one. Well, that's basically Occam's razor, and we use it all the time. But here's the thing. It turns out it's not just some clever trick we've learned. Nope. New research is showing that this preference for simplicity might actually be a deep, fundamental part of how our brains are wired. So let's get into it.
Okay, so take a look at this. It's a great little visual from the study. An apple falls from a tree. Now, what's the reason? Is it some, complicated invisible ghost pushing it down? Or is it just gravity? We all instinctively jump to gravity, don't we? And there's a good reason for that. See, the whole ghost idea is just, well, it's too complicated. A ghost could make the apple fall, sure, but it could also make it fly up or spin in circles or whatever. Gravity, on the other hand, is simple and predictable. It's powerful because it's simple.
So let's just put a quick official definition on it. Occam's razor is the principle that says when you've got a bunch of competing explanations for something, you should probably go with the simpler one. And it's really not about being lazy, it's more about not getting lost in the weeds, It stops us from creating these super complex theories to explain every tiny little blip in the data.
But that leads to the real mystery, the one these scientists wanted to crack. Why do our brains do this? Are we just taking a mental shortcut, being a little lazy to save brain power? Or is this preference for simplicity something way more profound, something fundamental to how we think? That's exactly what we're going to explore.
All right, so to even begin to answer that, we've got to deal with a really tough problem first. How on earth do you measure something like simplicity? I mean, it sounds so subjective, right? But as it turns out, these scientists figured out a pretty clever way to make it something you can actually measure.
Yeah, the big hurdle was taking this kind of philosophical idea and turning it into something they could properly test in a lab. They had to come up with a way to define simple using math so they could build a real experiment around it.
And here's how they did it, which is really cool. They broke complexity down into 4 specific geometric things. You could think of them as 4 different flavors of complexity. So you have dimensionality, like is it a single point or a whole line? You have boundaries, how wiggly are the edges? Then there's volume, how much space does it take up? And finally, shape, how curvy is it? The takeaway here is that simplicity isn't just one single thing. It has all these different parts you can actually measure.
Okay, so now that they had this mathematical way to define simplicity, they could finally put it to the test. They designed this really clever game to see if our brains really do have this built-in bias.
Here's what participants in the study saw. Imagine you're playing this game. You see a cloud of red dots. Think of them like seeds scattered on the ground. Then you see 2 black shapes, which are like 2 possible flower beds where the seeds could have come from. All you have to do is decide which flower bed did these seeds most likely come from.
So the whole task was super straightforward. 1, you see the cloud of dots. 2, you see the 2 shapes. And 3, you just pick the one you think is the source. It's that simple. But the genius part was that the researchers could change the shapes to be more or less complex across those 4 different measures we talked about. That's how they could test our bias for each one.
And what they found, well, it was fascinating. The results from this simple game started to reveal this really clear, measurable pattern in our choices. And honestly, it was a little bit irrational.
This visual right here shows it all perfectly. So this map shows how people voted. That straight line right down the middle, that's the perfectly logical dividing line. If you were a robot, that's where you'd switch your choice. But look at the colored area. That's what humans actually did. It's bent. It's curved toward the simpler shape. This means people were consistently choosing the simpler option, even when the evidence, the cloud of dots, was technically a little closer to the more complex one. Wild, right?
And here's the kicker. This wasn't some clever strategy people were using. This bias was still there even when it didn't help them get the right answer at all. That's a huge clue. It suggests this isn't something we consciously decide to do. It's just a built-in, hardwired feature of how we deal with uncertainty.
So naturally, this brings up a massive question, especially today. Is this kind of bias a uniquely human thing? What would an AI do? Would a powerful, perfectly logical artificial intelligence show the same kind of thinking? Well, the researchers decided to find out. They took an artificial neural network, an ANN, and trained it to be a perfect optimizer to get the best possible score on this exact same dot game. So the question was, would it also develop this irrational bias for the simple answer?
And the answer was a big, fat no. Look at this side by side. On the left, you've got the human map. It's biased, it's a bit messy. But on the right, that's the AI. Its decision line is perfectly straight, perfectly logical. It only prefers the simpler shape when that's what actually improves its score. There's no inherent bias at all. It's just pure, cold optimization.
And if you need a smoking gun, this graph is it. The researchers tried something else. They told people, hey, for this next round, ignore simplicity. Just pick whichever shape is actually closer to the dots. And guess what? People couldn't do it. You can see they still had that strong bias. But the AI, when they gave it the same instructions, it dropped the simplicity preference instantly, just like that. So for an AI, simplicity is just a tool in the toolbox. For us, it seems to be a rule we can't break.
So this really boils it all down. For the human mind, this simplicity bias is built in. It's always on. But for the AI mind, simplicity is just a strategy it learns to use, and only when it actually improves performance. For us, it's a trait. For the AI, it's a tool. Okay, so what are we supposed to make of all this? What does this huge difference between us and AI tell us about how our own minds actually work?
This is really the big, mind-bending idea from the study. The researchers think that our brains don't just find the one single best explanation for something. Instead, on some subconscious level, our minds are considering a whole family of possible explanations all at once, and then kind of averaging them all out.
Now, there's a fancy term for this, integrating over latent causes, but all it really means is averaging out all those hidden possibilities, and that is what creates our bias for simplicity. Think about it. A really complex explanation has a ton of ways it could be wrong, right? So when your brain does this averaging process, those complex models just get dragged down, and what's left is the simpler, more robust idea. It's like our brain has its own organic, built-in Occam's razor.
And that leaves us with a pretty deep thought. We usually think of our biases as bugs, right? Flaws in our thinking that we need to fix. But what if this isn't a bug at all? What if this deep-seated, hardwired preference for simplicity is actually a core feature of what makes human intelligence so special? If this is one huge difference between us and AI, it makes you wonder what else is in there, hardwired into our thinking, that separates our minds from the machines we're building.